Wozniak and Jobs started Apple. Wozniak wanted to create beautiful technology. Jobs wanted to change the world. He started that process in 2007 with the iPhone first launch. How we, as humans, interact with technology today has fundamentally changed as a result of that act. That is the pervasive access. We now have compute devices tethered to us as we move about in the world that we could not have conceived of 20 years ago, right? Back to the basic realities of technology, compute, storage, network. Cloud is about turning compute into a commodity, just like electricity. You walk into a room, you turn on a switch. That is about turning compute into a commodity. You turn it on when you want it, you turn it off when you don't. You don't have to buy a bunch of servers for your data center to a specific capacity. Use what you need when you need it. We're still in this transition period to take advantage of that. That's really where we're going. My first introduction to that was, I was at an AWS conference in London in 2010. It was AWS rolling out to EMEA. Werner Vogels, the chief technology officer at Amazon, was giving a description of what cloud was, and he threw a picture of an old steam engine with a bunch of old guys standing on it. And he says, "What is this?" No one can answer. And he says, "Well, it's a brewery. I'm Belgian, so this is a picture of a brewery, and this is the steam engine that powered the brewery, and these are the 11 engineers who took care of the steam engine." And then he asks the question, how many breweries have engines and engineers that keep that brewery running anymore? No one. That's how he started. So, on the other side of this, when we look at social, now that we have very powerful compute devices in everybody's pocket, now we have social platforms that grow on those things. That provides us visibility into human behavior and human relationships that we have never had access to before. Now we get into a lot of ethical questions around what does that mean, and our organization is using that data for good or not for good. That's a whole different conversation. But the platform now enables that to be possible. Our understanding of human behavior and human interaction is completely different. Something that we've never been able to understand in the history of human as a social species. Context and knowledge, information. Okay, again, now that I have this compute device in my pocket, for serving capabilities, applications, I have an ability to understand the context that the person's in, who's interacting with my technology, unlike anything I've ever been able to do. I know where they are. I know how long they're interacting with that technology. I know what they're trying to do with it. So my understanding at the personal level, it might be an abstracted person, an anonymous person, but still at the personal level is information that I did not have before. So that's the foundation. A very different reality of how humans interact with technology. Then what happens is, now we have the Internet of Things. And these are some numbers, 2009 to 2020. So the projections you see over here in 2020 were around 2016 when we put these out, and we're still on pace for that. And the idea of the Internet of Things is really, now I have objects out in the world who can sense, analyze, act, and communicate in whatever way I want them to. By 2020, we project that there are 7.3 billion personal devices in the world, 20 billion internet-connected things, so that's in addition to, and that we expect that the relationship of people to connected devices is 4:1. It's a very different reality than, again, what we thought possible 20 years ago. These two things working together basically is what has created digital, where you really have a blurring of the physical and the virtual world, right? Things, people, and organizations
are just, it's a seamless network between the two of them. Okay? That, at its core, when we talk about digital, at least from a Gartner perspective, this is really what we're talking about. The changing nature of technology, the changing nature of human interaction with technology, and how that is completely transforming the way in which we go about our life. And that the representation of what I'm doing in the physical world is very easy to represent in the digital world. What does that mean? How do I behave differently, both as an individual and then as an organization? Okay? So, with that in mind, let's talk about a specific example of how this manifests in an industry and the type of change that's going on. Because I'd say we are in the midst of a transformational age. Beyond just the catchword of digital transformation, I think the nature of human reality is changing as a function of the changing reality of technology. So let's look at an industry, music industry. How many of us remember pressed LPs? They were great, right? The context of the A-side, B-side, the idea of the album as a holistic thing, that was an important reality. Compact disc comes along and we kind of digitize those things. Eventually we get into a network reality in the early days of the internet, right? Peer-to-peer networking, Napster, so on, that changes the fundamental nature of how we distribute music as intellectual property, right? Technology went faster than the industry and the business construct. It broke it, right? We all know what happened in Napster, created a bit of a problem. Eventually, iTunes was kind of the first out there to solve the business problem. Oh, okay, now that I can distribute in this way, how do we do that in a way that the intellectual property-based business of music still is holistic? So that gets us to kind of that digital download. Once that business problem or the operational problem has been solved, then you just get the evolution of streaming. When's the last time you actually bought an album? I can't remember. I just subscribe to playlists that fit my mood, and that's about it. It's great music. I still enjoy music in life, but how I interact with that is completely different than how I used to interact with it. And that transformation was driven by the change in technology. Nothing else, the same as they used to. So, what we kind of talk about there is the difference between how do I optimize. So as things change, as things evolve, I'm thinking about how I'm changing my organization and how am I optimizing its business, its mission, based on technology. At some point, however, you get to an inflection point and you must transform. Right? So this goes back to a little bit of Andy Grove, founder and CEO of Intel. Some of his early writings: all organizations on a growth curve come to an inflection point, and at that inflection point, they must transform in some way, or they will start the downward curve. So you can continue to optimize, improve what you do, how you do it, so on and so forth, but you're gonna get to a point where transformation is required. If you don't transform, you won't survive. An example of this, I was in the office of one of the members I support about 9 months ago, and I was challenging his thinking, and he said, Tim, we are such and such, very well-respected global brand. And my only response to him was, and everybody used to buy everything from Sears. When's the last time you bought something from Sears? They're not around anymore. So, the need to transform is real. Why do I care about this? Because you can say, okay, important for global organizations, it's important for commercial organizations. Why do I need to care about this? So when we look in the public sector, government, public services, education, higher education, why do I care about this? One simple reason. All of us have increasing expectations based on our personal use of technology. Because we all now have this smartphone in our pocket, question, how many of you have read an instruction manual about any of the technology that sits on your phone? No one. How many of you have systems you work with at work or interact with as a citizen that you just don't know how it works? I run into that every day. And my company specializes in advancing technology. Right? So our expectation as individuals is increasing as the advancement of technology continues forward. Right? And that pace of change, Moore's law, right? Change just accelerates. We're still accelerating. I'm sure all of us, I know Eric does, he wrestles with, hey, I only have so many dollars. This is all great. I can't, but I only have so many dollars to spend. I can't keep pace with that change. It's difficult. So this gap continues to increase, right? It's not that you should try to change your funding to immediately close the gap, because that's likely not going to happen, right? But it's understanding that that gap exists, so that when you think about the types of initiatives, projects, things you want to pursue, you're going to pursue them in a way that helps close that gap, okay? I think the last forum, the railroad that was a great talk on using the Esri capabilities. That in and of itself personifies the opportunity to digital. Just before the break, again, using those technologies where you're creating better partnerships with your vendor community and writing their capabilities, because they're going to be the ones investing in these things. So it's finding a way to leverage what's going on to solve meaningful problems. There's the key point. To solve meaningful problems. Solving meaningful problems for all of us really gets down to our culture. So kind of bringing this home to, rather than trying to get dollars you can't get to implement completely new technology, what are some things that you can start thinking about? One of them is the culture in your organization, and how are you a change agent in this transformational age? What we see in our research, organizations that are really leaning in and succeeding are not all organizations that just have really deep pockets, but they're organizations that are thinking about their culture in a way that they're promoting a mindset that solves meaningful problems in a way that resonates with their stakeholder group, whether that be a citizenry or a customer or a business partner. And key aspects of those cultural patterns really are, one, a collaborative culture. Really supporting collaboration across work groups, not just in IT, but across your entire organization, important. Finding ways to be more agile. And when I say agile, we're not talking about agile methodology in the software development world. We're talking about the ability to pivot from one direction to the other direction because you just learned something new. And we all probably learn something new every day, right? So it's making sure that your organization that you're working in has the ability to, ooh, we just learned something new, I think we should change gears a little bit. Analytical. Data-driven decisions. Innovative. not unwilling to explore new ideas. Being willing to take a little bit of risk, measured risk, right? And being creative. Innovation and creativity are different. I think oftentimes when we kind of have this conversation, people say, well, aren't those things the same? Not really. Because I can be creative with things that aren't innovative. Right? Just apply some old stuff to a new use case. It's not really innovation, but it is creative. Okay? So finding a way to cultivate these cultural norms and these behaviors in your organization is part of that transformation. And like I said, this doesn't require millions of dollars in a tech budget, but helps position your organization for success. So that's why you should care. We've got a growing expectation gap between our citizens and the services we provide them, our customers and the way in which we fulfill their needs, and in the education space, our students and how they'd like to learn. So, what should we be doing differently? How do we kind of walk down this road? I'll give you kind of one way of thinking about this, and hopefully with the idea that you've got something that you can take away from the room today. Traditionally, this is kind of when we think about process improvements in technology or most IT shops, it's traditionally been the inside-out perspective, right? So focus on systems and processes that deliver value by providing a more stable foundation, right? And we think about that from a, what's the process? How do I work the process? So on and so forth. This is really around standardization. But what we're doing here is we're internally thinking about our organization, how we operate, and how we want our stakeholders outside, the people that are outside that circle. The implied assumption there is they're going to comply with the way in which we think we should operate, because we know better. The modern perspective, really, to lean into digital, is an outside-in perspective. Your focus, customers, the partners, the peers, what outcomes are they looking for? What's the meaningful problem that they want solved? And how do I deliver value to that problem statement? So it's no longer about how we want the process to work and how we want to design the process. It's starting with who's the stakeholder, who's the citizen, who's the student, who's the customer, what do they want solved, and let's be empathetic and put ourselves in their shoes and figure out how we want to solve it. Where this is evolving to really is kind of an ecosystem perspective. And I think what you're doing with ArcGIS is a great example, where you're becoming, how do you see your organization, your operation as an intermediary between a series of vendors and partners to deliver services to stakeholders and constituents and customers, right? This is how the world's gonna look in a network reality. We're seeing more and more networked systems, using systems in a small s, evolve in the world than we've ever seen before in history. When we talk about social media, those are network structures. The power social media has today gives you an example of the power of a network structure. So when you think about how are we solving problems, interesting, meaningful problems, moving in this direction is a good thought to consider. So, when we take that outside-in perspective, When we put ourselves in the shoes of our citizenry, or our customer, or our student, and think about what is their interest, what is the problem they want to solve, or are trying to solve, the way in which we do that is the concept of a journey map. So when you're looking at all of the commercial organizations out in the globe that are doing really interesting things and succeeding exceptionally well in the digital economy, they're all organizations that do this very well. And that's how they got to apps on your phone that you don't need instruction manuals for, because they're completely intuitive. Because the designers of those things tried to put themselves in your shoes to figure out, how do I deliver to this? A great example of this, I support a number of clients in the financial services industry. Great, and this should be reasonably understandable for everybody who's ever bought a home. An inside-out perspective, or we're talking about how our process works within the organization, is the idea, oh, okay, we've got to make the mortgage application process digital. That's what we're going to do. We're going to define how our customers apply for a mortgage in a digital context. That is not taking a customer journey approach. Because the journey the customer is on is not getting a mortgage. It's buying a home. So what's that journey look like? And when you widen your aperture, widen your thought process more in that way, you begin to see a lot more opportunities to touch your customer, to touch your constituent in a different way. You put yourself in their shoes and you walk through that journey. What does that look like? Journey map that we see here is, and I chose this one, this is the Rail Europe Experience Map. Part of the reason I'm throwing this up, there's a whole bunch of information on this journey map online. So if this seems interesting to you, this is something you can go do further reading on. But there's some key components to what a good journey map looks like. The top of that is the lens. What lens am I going to, if I'm the designer, what lens am I going to put on this journey? So things like, people choose rail travel because it's convenient, easy, and flexible. Rail booking is only one part of people's larger travel processes. Me being an enterprise architect, it gives you some criteria also that you can look at that journey against. This is where you want to start. So if we kind of go back to that buying a home, first place to start if you're in a little bit of a design work group is, okay, if the customer's journey is buying a home, what are the key principles that most people have when they're buying a home? Start with that. Simple list. Keep it short. Next, this is the journey model. Call it a process model, call it a process flow. The more interesting you can draw them, this is where you can start pulling out new learnings and different ways of thinking about the process that your customer, your constituent, or your student's going through to highlight new opportunities for you to help them. They don't all need to look alike. They don't all need to look kind of like this. It's really, what does the design team want it to look like based on observation? This is in a kind of the lean world manufacturing. One of these concepts in lean is the concept of the Gemba walk. A Gemba walk is, Gemba means go see. So a Gemba walk is, if you're a designer and you're trying to solve a problem in a certain space, go into that space. Watch people. See what they're doing. You're going to see the problems they need solved. even though they may not recognize them, just through observation. Based on that observation, you're drawing a map that illuminates key dimensions. That's very, very, very important. This gives you the opportunity to figure out how you pivot. How do you want to think about this in a different way? Draw the map that prompts you in a way to think about your problem space differently. And think through what are the phases. That gets us kind of to this top level. What are the overall phases this person's going through? For instance, in buying a home, what's the first phase that triggers someone to say, I want to buy a home? Next, qualitative insights. Here's where the empathy comes into play. Here's where putting yourself in the shoes of your stakeholder, the constituent, the customer, or the student. Here's where this happens. In this method, you want to think about what are they doing, what are they thinking, how are they feeling, right? I think in the last session, as you were talking about what you were doing with the Esri capabilities, there was some frustration in that story. I remember at the beginning of, well, it's going to take us a lot of time, it's going to cost $50,000. There's some feeling going on there. So as you walk through your process, think about how the customer is interacting with the process you're presenting to them. Swim lessons. You solved a big problem. A problem that people were not feeling good about, right? How much of that was a motivation to think about how you want, what you put first in your e-com platform, right? Solving the big problems, solving the things that cause real frustration for people helps you get to solutions that are meaningful, that people adopt quickly. Thinking asks, how can I use this? Is it gonna work? Is it valuable, right? As you're representing your journey map, the feeling side, you want to talk about how customers are feeling in that step of the process. Write it down. This is that process of articulating the feeling gives you visibility to what problem are you solving or not solving. Qualitative, pretty straightforward. Qualitative information is, as you lay out your journey map, what are the things that are happening that you can measure, right? At the end of the day, we're talking about investing time and energy. That means we need to make sure that we're getting a return on that time and energy investment. So as you think about constructing a journey, being qualitative and understanding what data you can capture relative to the journey and how you measure its efficacy and efficiency is important. And then the takeaways. The takeaways really is where this becomes an iterative process. If you walk down the road of starting to leverage a journey map construct as a way of working, think that it's important that you don't see the map itself as the conclusion. Right? It's a bit of the cliche, life's about the journey, not the destination. Once you have your first version of a map done, you're not done. That's just the first version. We live in a human world that's always changing. That map's going to change. Your takeaways in that first version is really where you start thinking about where could this go. Drives the next phase. Articulates opportunities or pain points that you might not be able to solve in this first version of an MVP that you're putting out. but it gets you some ideas to stick in your backlog of, okay, version 2, we're going to tackle that problem. So, what's coming in the future? Let's look at how many of you are familiar with the Gartner hype cycle? Few of you. Okay, I'll do a quick primer here. Some wonderful marketing material for us, but it actually is meaningful and good stuff. So, the innovation trigger. This is basically, we plot new technologies on a hype cycle. And down below, years to mainstream adoption, and really kind of the adoption is here. Less than 2 years, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, more than 10, or before it actually becomes mainstream, it's going to be obsolete. So the innovation trigger, usually when a new technology hits the press, that's the innovation trigger for us. We start paying attention to it. When in the press it becomes hyped as this is a game changer, it's going to transform everything, that's what we call the peak of inflated expectations. So the press always goes faster than reality. The trough of disillusionment is, yeah, this is not yet a game changer. Thanks for all that. I wasted a lot of time and energy. So you get into that trough of disillusionment, but the valley of despair that any of us that have implemented any technology projects, you always go through that valley of despair. There's a dark time. You'll eventually get out of it. That's the slope of enlightenment. Understanding the real and relative impact of technology is building. And then it becomes mainstream, right? Now you're at the point where you're harnessing the capability that that technology brought to bear. So that's the general structure. So I'm going to close with this. This is what our hype cycle looks like for smart city technologies today. I won't go through all of it. This is a rather extensive research paper. But I did underline 3 things. And I'll underline these 3 things because, one, they're not things that require millions of dollars of investment. And 2, they are things that are on the innovation trigger that we say are going to hit that plateau in 2 to 5 years. So new things that are going to mature very quickly. First one is civic and community development. So simple case study, New York City, citizen developers using some open data, and this category of data for good, pushed out an app to help people with parking. Reduction of parking, no. City of New York probably doesn't like this because it was a bit of a revenue reduction for them, but parking fines materially dropped. This was not something the city built, it's not something the company built, it was something a group of citizens built, right? At the break we were talking about how do we pool resources to help in the realm of cybersecurity. This is in that vein of how do we, as a group of citizens in an area, combine resources to be better than each of ourselves individually, right? For organizations that don't have big, deep pockets, community development from a technology perspective is a great way to tap into technology talent. What's growing here is the ability to do that in a safe, secure way. Right? Second one, chatbots. These are evolving extremely fast. The world of natural language processing is exponentially better than it was 2 years ago, and it's going to be exponentially better 12 months from now. I can actually talk to Siri now, or more importantly, Siri can actually understand what I'm saying now. It took a while to get there. As we see Google Home, we see Alexa, these are just ongoing examples where the chatbot and that natural language interaction is becoming a very, very important way for humans to interface with technology. I just finished a little bit of a project. I'm a home brewer. I've been a home brewer for about 27 years. I just upgraded my brewery at home to a Raspberry Pi with some Python scripts and some Amazon trained, so it's voice command now. Fully automated brewery, voice command. It's beautiful. My wife rolls her eyes every time I'm out there. But this technology is becoming easier and easier to tap into. We're seeing it used exceptionally well in higher education, where things like registration. Over the summer months, summer melt, where students drop off. They don't come back in the fall for a number of different reasons. A lot of them are around the complication of registering for classes in the fall. Georgia State, little POC built by 2 developers in the comp sci department, pushes out a chatbot, and they reduced summer melt by 5% the first time out. They took 50,000 student inquiries in 1 month. No increase in FTE, huge value, simple solution. And I can guarantee you every one of those students probably loved talking to it better than getting on a phone and the whole process of having to talk to someone on the phone. So chatbots, you're going to see a lot more of this. And then data for good. The whole concept of open data, providing, now, this is where security also becomes an interesting part of the puzzle, but providing access to data in a way that your citizenry or constituency can leverage that data for good. So, I'll stop there. 3 things that you should see maturing very rapidly. I went quickly, and I'm over by 5 minutes. Apologies. Do we have time for questions?
Oh, yeah.
Any thoughts, questions? A lot very fast.
When you were talking about the gap, going back to that slide, there was a change in slope in the employee ability graph.
Yes.
What does that reflect, and why is that there?
This one.
Yeah. The employee ability to exploit all of a sudden takes a major uptick.
So our top line here is, this is the advancing new technology. So the new releases of technology over time. This bottom line is, those of us that work in organizations, we're not going that fast. So this slope of innovation and new capabilities is rising faster than we can keep up. So sooner or later we get into this situation, and we're kind of here now, where the type of tools and capabilities that we provide as organizational leaders for our employees internally, and let's say for many government organizations for their constituency, we can't keep pace. We don't have the dollars to keep pace with the commercial organizations that are driving all that technical innovation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but up there it looks like that line all of a sudden takes a major uptick from the employee ability. Is that a cultural change of maybe more millennials in the workflow percentage, or what makes that tick up like that on the lower line?
In a lot of, I think this is I don't know that's not necessarily, there's not hard data behind that, it's more representational, but I do think it is what we've been seeing, let's say over the past 5 years, is the deprecation of legacy platforms, where those legacy platforms are never going to support a digital experience. And when I say a digital experience, I mean real-time, immersive, so on and so forth. Right. So as we see old legacy platforms dropping off in the world, the internal ability to pivot and innovate is increasing for fewer dollars. Pat?
At the beginning you mentioned funding, challenges with funding. And we all know that when we innovate, we have to keep the old stuff alive while we're making new stuff.
Yes.
Do you have any strategies, or have your customers hit that secret sauce of getting the people in those?
Because that's not going to get you your money. Talk about a story. Make the story have to deliver. That's the secret sauce, I think. Yeah. It's motherhood now. My answer is motherhood now what, but it's
following it.
yeah. Jim.
Oh, just an observation on the line there. You're out past 2020 on automation and machine learning.
Yes.
You use students in your example as heavy consumers, and do you have an example of a very progressive, maybe educational institution that's kind of adopted digital transformation ideology and deployed that?
I do from a higher ed perspective. The Georgia state system is a state system that has leaned into digital technology quite heavily. Both Georgia Tech, Georgia State are doing interesting things. Also in New York, they're doing some interesting things. And then we kind of see pockets in other places. I support a few Pac-12 schools. Both of them have begun to lean in, but there were how do we clean out the trash in order to do the interesting stuff. So they're still part in that front side of that curve.
Anything on a K-12 public arena?
I don't know off the top of my head, but we can follow up. Yeah, and because there are some K through 12 organizations around the country that are doing interesting things. Absolutely. All right.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I walk around too, so hopefully you can hear me okay. To answer your question, ASU and the City of Phoenix are actually working collaboratively together on smart community collaboration, as well as the University of Reno and the City of Reno doing the same thing. So we're seeing more and more collaboration between higher ed and local government, as we are between necessarily state governments. So we'll talk about urban data management and how that kind of builds into it. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Chuck Lott. I'm with Dell EMC, and I've been with the company for about 7 years now. That includes the merger. I came from EMC side. As you may have known, Dell Technologies is now actually a family of 8 companies. So real quick, I promise, Dell clients, infrastructure, cloud native application development, SecureWorks, RSA, our security companies. VirtuStream is a service provider, internet service provider, off-premise. And VMware is, if you will, a cloud orchestration company. If you are familiar with virtualization and how you can leverage that software to be more efficient. It also works with the cloud integrations with a bunch of our ecosystem of our partners. And Boomi is an application interface software that's based in the cloud that allows you to navigate data across different providers, whether it's on-premise or off-premise. I should say, by the way, the term smart cities, I don't really like that one. I use the term smarter cities because cities use technologies now and the way of looking at these new capabilities as a way to be smarter to help their citizens. Ultimately, it's about having a happy place to live, citizens that are engaged, citizens that are happy. It doesn't have to be a huge high-tech hub of everything tech. It's really about making sure that you scale to what makes sense for the community that you're in. But there is a lot of change going on. And the topic I'm talking about is urban data as part of this ecosystem. And so the communities are facing challenges. I mean, we all have smartphones like we heard Tim talk about. We all are now carrying around edge devices. And what's happening is that urbanization is real. We're actually predicting by, 2050, 75% of people in the US will be in an urban environment, less in a country environment. And me though, I just moved into the country, so I'm on 10 acres and love the view. So I don't know, I guess I'm bucking the trend there. But it does affect change about how people interact with their communities. There's more people together, there's more services that are needed, and there's problems. We have challenges. The infrastructure is hard to upgrade. It's expensive to upgrade. It's hard to get money. We just talked about what's the secret sauce for getting city councils to fund things, and there's a whole bunch of answers, but there's no one really good answer. Certainly, a compelling story is obvious, but also baby steps. And we'll talk about how San Jose did some baby steps a little bit later on in a couple of use cases I have. But the things that's interesting about the notion of smart communities or digital communities, as Dell likes to say, because we think of digital communities as high ed, K-12, local government, state governments. So it's really a community of different capabilities. And everybody just wants to be efficient. We want safety for our kids. We want our data to be safe. We want to maintain our privacy. But we want it to be enriching. We want it to be more interactive and useful for us. And it should be for everybody. Nobody's excluded from this capability. And imagine this. And these are examples. These are real. And this is going on already today. Right now, Bellevue, Washington has reduced traffic times 36%. Spain. Predictive policing in New York saved them $90 million. Another example about predictive policing in the city of Charlotte-Mecklenburg in North Carolina. They actually, the police department, the chief went to the city council and said, I need another officer. I just need another body out on the street helping to police. And they said, nope. Oh, gee, thanks. We really appreciate your concern and your support. No, go fix the problem using technology. So they looked at it. We were part of an ecosystem of companies that came in and helped them. Used predictive analytics to better predict where crime would happen in that city. Reduced crime. Saved money. The problem was communities outside that area all of a sudden saw a crime increase go up because the police realized that's, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, it's better police now. So, a good thing and a sort of a oops thing. But the idea being that predictive analytics are real and can help a community be safer and be safer for everybody. Another example, improved city functions. New York City, again, doing a lot of work in this area to improve how they operationally behave. But when we talk about Internet of Things in a few minutes, New York City also just did a survey of all their devices on the network. They found 100,000 of them they didn't know existed. And they think that that's about 1/10 of what they really have out there. So the security implications of this are tremendous. Chicago is using these technologies to monitor air and water quality. And then Seoul, Korea is improving their ability to recycle. So just a couple of 5 or 6 examples here of where these different communities are doing things to help improve the citizen environment. It all comes down to data. Leveraging the data that you have, being smart about what your priorities are, understanding why you want to do something, not just do something because you can do something. Make sure you have a compelling argument and buy in and take baby steps. This can work, and it does work. At some point, as the communities evolve, it becomes really an ecosystem of capabilities. So if you look at all the city or community services, this is a subset of them, but they can all be linked together. Now, you don't start and do all this all at once. It's not recommended, virtually impossible, and nobody will fund that. So the reality is you take the baby steps, but you plan for this kind of environment before you get there. And even the next step after that is you can start working with local government, state government, federal government, and each have their own communities of information that you can share and leverage across government entities to help citizens and to help operational improvements. The Internet of Things is huge. Tim spoke about it a few minutes ago about how big it's going to be in 2020. We're predicting by 2031 there's going to be 200 billion devices. That's going to be 25 times more than the population of the Earth in that year. Can you imagine that? Every person's going to have 25 devices in effect, per capita, right? Globally. That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. And so some of the things that are emerging now to address that are artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality, augmented reality, all these technologies are coming in place to try to figure out how to get their arms around this information. And what's interesting finding so far is that simple algorithms with a lot of data will outperform those big complex data warehouses you've had in the past. There's a different architecture, different ways you can do these things, and simplify it and be more useful, and it's less expensive. So this goes back to a different theme of why to do all this stuff, and it's really to tailor the experience to the city, and the results of studies are showing that people are happier when they have a digital community environment moving forward. They've done studies that says, hey, we're happier, we're more engaged, we think our quality of life is actually improved as a consequence of a smart way of applying technology to solve citizen problems. But there's some considerations. I mean, a digital strategy is not a one-stop shop. We do this stuff, Gartner advises on it, a lot of other companies are doing it. Kind of like the cyber world, if you look at a logo sheet of all the different companies in cybersecurity today, you'll see about 1,000 logos right now, probably 2,000 by the end of next year. But there are some real things to think about as you move forward with considering a digital strategy. First of all, why are you doing it? You're going to help the citizens, make it a better community, scale it to what the community needs. But also realize that you need to have a plan in place to allow you to scale over time. So it's not a one-stop thing. You do a pilot, but you go in there with a design up front so that you understand what you're trying to get to at the end of the day. One of the consequences that's happening because of the Internet of Things is that a distributed architecture model is emerging. So we said there's going to be 200 billion devices in, is that 12 years? Is that 13 years? I did the math here. We're going to find that there's going to be a different way people are going to not just interact, and what they're saying, 40% of our interaction in 15 years is going to be with machines, and we don't even know it. That's kind of interesting, right? But also what we're finding is that a distributed architecture model is probably the next evolution of how information is going to be processed, because when you have 200 billion devices out here, there's no possible way you can shoot all that information across to a service provider, whether it's a cloud or your own premise. It's just too much. The network latency is going to kill you. The storage will kill you. You don't need it. And besides, if you have a device like a light, a smart light, it's sending 1.6 gigabytes of data per day. A smart light. And you know what 90% of it is? I'm on, I'm on, I'm on, I'm on. That's what it's saying. Do you really care about that? No. So you have to filter out what to send and what not to send. And so there's more computing that's going to be happening out here to determine what actually goes back there for a different kind of analysis. Michael Dell, our chairman, says that 40% of the computing will be on the edge within 12 years. Some people say he's underestimating, but Intel's really happy. They're selling a lot of chips. So. If you look at it a little bit differently from this distributed model, here's all the different places, and this is, they call it the fog, and that's the current term. So it's data that's sort of in the middle between whether it should be in the cloud or it should be on the edge, and where should the compute lie. It's an evolving model. We believe that a hybrid model over time gives you the most flexibility. Hybrid meaning that your data can be at any service provider. You could, whether it's your own, ours, Amazon's, Microsoft's, doesn't matter, as long as you can move it around. As long as it's transportable, that's a hybrid model, gives you the most choice, most flexibility over time. Eventually, you'll get to this idea of a single platform or an ecosystem of tools to create a platform. And we have a big chunk of this, of course. Other companies have a lot of big chunks of this. But this is sort of where the whole community can look. You want it to be open, agile, secure. It needs to be flexible. And we like to use the term software-defined. Everybody familiar with the software-defined terminology? Meaning you don't care about the hardware anymore, you just use software to move things around. Configure your network by software, not by plugs and switches and things like that. Make it easier. Related to all this, again, is security. Security is always going to be a part of this. When you talk about all those devices, all those problems, When we look at the old world of cybersecurity, it was just put up a brick wall and hope they didn't get in. That was the old model. It really does not work. I mean, we saw from the presentation earlier today exactly what happened here, which is this. They were targeted. Can you see that okay? They were stealthy. That's what it says there. And they were interactive. They planned this. So there was your intrusion. They came in, checked things out, and they acted. This is the model that happened here. Then the attack is identified, and then you figure out a response. Well, the new way of doing this is to actually move forward your ability to identify an attack before it happens. That's the goal. Have a response ready to go even before an attack happens. You're not going to be able to stop the attack, perhaps, but perhaps you can have a better handle on how to respond to it prior to it happening, if you have knowledge of it. And then to help mitigate, not stop, but mitigate the ability of the act of intrusion is increase the friction of them getting in the first place. Oh, this is not free, by the way. It costs a lot of money. It's really hard. You know, there's a lot of resources out there, whether it's the federal government, money of this. Currently, this is how money was usually allocated for cybersecurity. It was all about prevention. Put those walls up, make them thick as you can, and keep them out. Just keep them out. Oh, and then respond. Plan for response and monitoring some. What we're really finding is that that model is evolving. It should be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. That's what we're advising our customers today. Put 1/3 in each of those. Have a response plan ready to go before you need to use it. Prevent actively. The hottest professional career right now is cybersecurity. Cybersecurity. People who in the military are coming out of the military and with that background, and many of them have clearances, they're going right into that job and cleaning up, frankly. Another aspect to digital communities is blockchain. So I'm not going to get into all the details and technical aspects of it, but it is coming. It's going to be all over the place. It's going to be adopted on a global basis. There's a lot of countries that are considering adopting it right now because they'd rather just skip over all the other stuff and just go right to a secure way of having secure contracts, to have safer elections. It's an append-only digital ledger. Uses encryption, so it's safe. There's different types of blockchains. There's private blockchains, there's public blockchains. The public blockchains that use like cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, those are slow, a little bit cumbersome, but right now I think the Bitcoin one has, at last stat, 120 million transactions in it roughly. It's only 5 years old. It's pretty amazing. But blockchain doesn't have to be involved with cryptocurrency. That's just kind of part of what it can do. And here's just some of the use cases that are being used right now in the blockchain world. The observation I have about blockchain is that it is not something that is coming from IT. It's coming from city councils. It's coming from state legislatures. State legislatures have put more blockchain legislation in the books in the last 2.5 years than any IT conversation I've seen nationally. I go to national conferences like National Association of State CIOs and state technology directors. Blockchain, oh yeah, we're kind of looking at that. Talk to the legislatures, oh yeah, we already have legislation to adopt it. And why is that happening? Well, because banks see this as a big next step in how financial transactions will be managed. The state of Ohio is using it right now. I can go on for several more of those, but the one that's interesting to me is election systems. Back in a former life, I designed election systems. So I got involved with sort of voter registration and how the election night reporting works and all that kind of stuff. And they're using blockchains right now in several states to manage or to confirm the identity of a service person serving overseas as a way to make sure that their vote is considered, make sure that they're the right person, but then also to keep their vote anonymous, which is the secret to democracy, right? Nobody knows who we voted for. Let's talk about it. There's a lot of that going on. One of the things that Dell does is that we partner with folks on the digital communities world. So Atos is one of our partners, and these are just 4 of the different offerings that we bring to the table with those guys. Urban data management being one of them. I'm going to talk about that for a second. We also do managed video surveillance, which, as we know, body cams, cop cams, drone cams. There's cams about everywhere nowadays, right? So we do solutions with those guys on that. Next generation 9/11, we're partnering with them on that. You know, the whole first responder new network that's going in place. And then, of course, blockchain application development, we're partnering with those guys also. Again, I like smarter. Urban data management is a smarter city offering. It's not the only city offering as part of this environment, but it's all about managing information in your community in baby steps. You know, again, don't build a high-tech, cool thing. Build what's appropriate to the community. Use data as an enabler. It really is the secret to allowing you to be successful, understanding what's going on in the information. You already have it in your systems. You don't need to spend a lot of money on infrastructure or other tools to pull it into an environment to do analytics. We use open source technologies all over the place to make it free. You can do this. That's how we're going to get started with this. We use open source tools, cloud native tools, and they start very small. An interesting part about it is that the data is actually in many places. It's in your own systems, it's in third-party providers, whether it's a local provider, but it's also in national providers. So, you know, AT&T is a data source, potentially, for a digital community initiative. But so is the local team that's doing traffic management. All those are part of the data ecosystem in an urban environment today. So let's talk about what San Jose is doing. San Jose, pretty, you know, big place, Silicon Valley. They decided a few years ago they wanted to pursue the digital community model. And just by way of size, you know, they're 180 square miles, so very small by Alaskan standards. 6,000 employees, you know, fair number of folks. They think that they have a lot of elevation in San Jose. So it is a little mountainous, I guess you could argue, but I would say probably not quite the same as here and other places. But that's just some of the aspects of the city. And the process they went through really came from the mayor and the city council. They said, we want to be a smart city, a digital communities player, but let's provide some guidance. So they stepped up to the plate and said, first, user-friendly. It has to be sustainable. This can't be just a one-off, do a pilot, I get my bullet statement on my campaign flyer, and then I move on to the next office. No, this has to be something that's meaningful and unique and relevant to the citizens over time. They have to be able to demonstrate it, show that it works, has to be safe, and has to be for citizens, not any one particular community or any particular group with a bias. They used those 5 principles, and worked with the CIO, Rob Lloyd, to say, we're going to champion the customer. We're going to be relentless about making sure the customer experience is useful, it's meaningful, it's relevant. We're going to learn. They're going to get the data, they're going to make sure they understand it, they're going to dissect it, apply what they've learned, and improve it. And that's an iterative process, of course. In terms of their architecture, they kind of divided it up this way. We worked with a company called NTT on this one, in part. They use a lot of open source tools. They use some of our equipment as well. But they really kind of said, okay, we have an ecosystem, we have a platform, we have data architecture, and we have analytics. Those are the kind of 4 categories they lumped everything together in to create sort of what their platform would look like. They also then went through a process of saying, here's how we could use the data. Here's where it makes sense to consider using it. Not that we're going to do all these all at once by any means. They started with traffic, and that's what I'm going to go through just a second. As part of their plan, they wanted to make sure they could plan for the future. So they saw data architecture as a hub, as a starting point. It's a, if you will, hub and a spoke and a wheel model. They recognized, like in the earlier slide, that there's different providers of information, whether it's an Amazon or another cloud provider or themselves or AT&T or a billing system, what have you, they had an architecture that could scale and have an integration capability so they could pull that data in as it was relevant to the use case they were pursuing. They did data visualization, so they used Tableau and Microsoft Power BI, which is really, really hard to read. And you can translate that though, and we have GIS people in the room, you'll appreciate this one. So as an example, they did a application that simply analyzed the data to find where the predominant traffic problems were and where there were public safety results, and then, fatalities or casualties, if you will. Then they said, okay, this is probably the percentage of where it's going to happen. Why don't we assign police officers to those areas? We deployed out tow trucks and ambulances into those areas where those things happen because they were able to figure out, between these 3 hours on a day, where the problems were happening. Very simple example. Denver, for example, their first foray into the smart cities world was they put Wi-Fi on buses. The whole idea was to bridge the digital divide, make sure everybody had access to the internet in some form or fashion. Then they realized the buses were Wi-Fi enabled, they knew where the buses were. Then they said, wow, there's an accident over there. I'm going to route the bus around that. I'm going to create an app that tells the user where the bus is going to be and when in a more accurate fashion, given traffic issues or given where there's accidents. So very baby steps to do all those things. They continue to do this today. They're analyzing whether or not the data points are actually helping things, and so there are places where they're seeing improvements and better response to an incident that happens, somebody gets to the hospital faster, and a better chance of surviving if it's really serious. So just one example of where GIS and data can be used to affect public safety. So wrapping up here, just a convergence of major trends. We have incremental computing is going down. The cost of computing is just getting lower. It'll never be zero because there's no such thing as free, right? I mean, we are in a capitalistic society, right? So, but the Internet of Things is growing. It's going to be huge. You saw some of the numbers that we're predicting. The technology, I mean, Moore's Law is 18 months. It might even be accelerated from that now. We're not really sure what the answer is, but it certainly feels like 18 months is a short period of time, given the advances today. It seems like it's every 12 months or something more revolutionary is coming out. The cloud has certainly changed how people look at how they can deliver services and leverage computing power, whether it's storage or networking or computing. That has changed how governments can think about how they operationalize themselves. Like Tim talked about, the social media, social and mobile evolution is huge. And certainly all this relates to big data analytics and where all that's going. So those are some examples of where, I talked about a couple of them where, analytics are used as a way to help understand what's going on and to provide different and better citizen services. So then you say, where do I start? Solve a specific problem. Start small. No reason to go big. If you want to buy big from me, I'm happy to sell you something, but it's not necessary. It's really not. We don't actually try to sell anything in this world. We rely on our partners to do services with very small baby steps. That's our model. We figure over time, as you evolve, as you figure out what you want to do, then you'll get there. You'll go to the cloud and go to somebody else. It doesn't matter. You'll pick a path that made the most sense, and hopefully you plan for an architecture that allows you to scale as well. So you can grow into it as a reference as opposed to buy it big and then try to fit it in and do it all at once, because that doesn't pay off. There are benefits, architect for the future, and pick a team that you know that you can trust and you can win with. That's it. Any questions?
Maybe I'll ask the same question as in dealing with customers that you discovered the secret sauce when approaching what is obviously a new investment with a group of policymakers. You know, tell the story. I appreciate that. But is there manufacturer financing? Are we talking about bonds of some kind, or what have you seen that works?
Well, the San Diego Unified School District about 5 years ago went through a process of passing a bond to do infrastructure improvements and system improvements. And they were able to spend it took them about 18 months to get that through. I think it was like in the neighborhood of $7 million. So that was one way they were able to put forward a financing model that allowed them to make changes over time. They didn't get all the money all at once. It was managed by the city council, so they divvied it up over time. Everybody had to make business cases for how the money would be spent. So that was one example of how that's been done. I think another place that's getting a lot more attention, even though it's not enough in terms of real funding, is cybersecurity. It's actually getting more attention when you start seeing that in large metro areas or even states, if there's a breach, CIO is fired. Simple as that. Sony pictures, not the best example, but the buck stops there. That's just kind of how it works. Legislatures are not quite there in terms of providing the level of funding probably they should be, in my personal opinion. Do they recognize it? I think some of them do, but it's sort of like one of those things, until you're personally affected, it doesn't hit the mark as well. It's like, oh, they just stole a movie, yeah, whatever, no big deal. They'll make another one, right? So I think there's a certain personal impact that needs to happen, and I don't say need to happen, I don't mean it that way. It will likely happen before people start getting more attention to it. So in some cities and states, you'll see that they've been breached, they've had problems, and all of a sudden it's top of mind, and we're going to find a way to get some funding. Other places that haven't had that problem yet aren't quite adopting that model yet.
Well, related to that, right? So is there like a path that's just, what's spurring this on in San Jose, for example, the other example you just provided, right? As far as, I guess, demonstrating the burning bridge, for example. I mean, around here, try to get funding for security. It just doesn't happen until you have a massive breach, right? But this is not just here. I mean, this has been happening in my career, right?
Yeah, for the last 5 or 6 years.
You're waiting for an event to happen before it gets any kind of attention. So on some of this, I'm not sure, maybe there's an event that happened that maybe, well, you've seen maybe a lot of data analysis was kind of going on through some kind of older method that says, well, here's, so what led them to say, to actually do a deep dive on the data on traffic accidents in San Jose? Do you happen to know?
Well, so have you been to San Jose?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's as bad as Los Angeles.
I used to live there. It's the worst. It's the worst freeway in the country.
It's the worst traffic system in the world besides, well, Los Angeles, Tokyo, New York, Miami, Dallas, Austin,
They don't have traffic.
Chicago.
You just get out and walk.
Right. But it really came down from the mayor and the city council. They said, we want to embrace this program. And they characterized it as a program as opposed to a project. So this had a more sustainable model of how they looked at it. And they're also kind of going, well, we're Silicon Valley. It would look pretty bad if, we didn't have Wi-Fi on our buses, much less know what's going on in terms of traffic patterns. So they picked traffic to start with, probably because it's easier, frankly. They had the data already, so it's easier to get to. But they saw it again as a stepping stone. And they tried to create a vision of those 5 principles that gave them a model to work on the program over a period of time. So it really comes down to vision and interest at a local government level, in my mind. Not all of them are interested, and sometimes smaller communities, the value prop doesn't pencil out to them. Other ones it does. Like I mentioned, City of Reno and City of Phoenix, they're embracing it fully. Maricopa County in Arizona is embracing it. City of Austin's embracing it. Chicago, City County Denver are embracing it. Miami-Dade's embracing it. So the larger ones are starting to do it. Nationally, there's conferences every other week on smart cities or digital communities, however you describe it. I'm actually in Arizona doing another one of these Thursday. So that's a linkage between the City of Phoenix and Arizona State. So we're seeing that kind of collaboration as well.
Well, it's interesting just about expectation settings from the earlier presentation and then here. it's, well, just like swim lessons, right? I was the guy on e-commerce kind of business analysis, and I'm sitting there in line, and I've got, right, and we're sitting in there for 2 hours to kind of line up. It's just like in the 70s.
Yeah.
So it was kind of nostalgic in that way. Make sure we get backing up.
Well, I'll leave you with an interesting quote. So the city of Boston says, if you need to come to the city hall, I think that's a great way to think about it. Thank you for your time.
Good, we didn't turn it off because I'm having trouble with the microphone today. All right. I think, is there food?
Yeah, should be.
Okay. All right. Oh yeah. Wow. Okay. Is it ready to go? So it's in some trays over there. So everyone, if you want to grab some lunch, but don't go. I'll set up in a couple minutes, and maybe we can kind of go through a couple questions like we tried to do about some of the information we saw right now. And then I got a few different points to kind of make about suggestions for next forum. So stick around and grab some food. We'll be back in a few minutes.